Hello, Jake.
Hello.
It's been a minute since I talked to you, almost literally.
Yeah. We actually had a conversation yesterday, but
Yes.
we're doing some.
Nobody knows
we're doing
that
some,
unless that they do.
unless that they do. Yeah.
We're doing the old travel, shake up the schedule and queue one up. And Tim Fernholz is here with us again. You were on, I don't know when that was, a year ago? We fought about the Space Force? Last February. Yeah.
Last February. Okay.
I remember it being a lovely conversation in which I felt like we were fighting the whole time and yet agreed on multiple things. That's kind of how it felt.
All right. Well, maybe we can achieve the same result here today.
We agreed very aggressively last time we talked.
Conflict, friendship. It's all happening.
We don't really have a rundown for the show, but we absolutely have a rundown for the show because there's only one story these days. But Jake, it's a little early on the schedule here. Did you bring a drink of any particular sort?
I did. You know what? It's Friday, so it's like whatever. But I have something fun to kind of show here. So, it's December. I'll just show it first. So of course, I'm doing a little eggnog here. I don't know how.
I always think it's a paralyzer the first time you bring up a milky drink.
I got a little cinnamon on top there. But this was fun because I made this in October, and this is an aged eggnog. So so you like mix it all together with all the alcohol and stuff, and then you stick it in the fridge. It's been in a carboy in the back of my fridge for the last 2 months. And
so the mead is not going well. Is what
the mead's getting better. Actually, I tasted the mead yesterday, one of my most recent batch, and it was good. I finished the sample, so it's things are coming along.
Started out as a mead shop. He's ended as an aged eggnog.
Aged eggnog. So anyway, I'm trying this today. We'll see how it goes. But cheers.
Yikes. Tim, Cheers. It's even earlier for you. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not boozing over here.
Seems pretty ill-advised if that was...
Yeah. But I have a special festive mug. Where's the camera? Here we go.
That's fantastic.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yes. That's a great mug.
Love it.
Excellent mug. Jake, you should have had one of the Christmas Vacation mugs. No, you should have had the moose one from Christmas Vacation.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, you got to get some of this.
The moose one.
If I could send you anything, I would send you some of those.
Yeah.
I can. I made a little gin and tonic in our Yetis from Sea, Space Exploration Engineering, branded gin and tonic. Made it straight in the Yeti, so a little bit of a tall boy, I think. Didn't really have a good scale for how much was going in, so
just eyeballing it, just winging it.
It's good. I put a lot of lime. That was a shitload of lime, almost a whole lime, I feel like, but it's good. That's how it feels like the afternoon. So
I worry about you guys sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, hey, you're on Substack now. Come on, you're doing the whole Substack thing these days. Which is actually why we said, hey, we should have Tim on, is this little Substack article you have here.
Yeah, I was doing a little post-election thinking about how everything happened. And, I was just thinking about space policy in the Biden administration and how it was sort of the dog that didn't bark. We had, under the previous Trump administration, all kinds of stuff happening in space. Military space, civil space, going to the moon, National Space Council. And it's sort of, after that, we didn't see as much activity. My colleague Jacqueline Felcher just released at Payload her review of the last year in space policy and noted that there were 0 Space Council meetings, which sort of says like priorities. And it was a campaign year and all of that, but I think it sort of spoke to missed opportunities for the Harris administration. And now, with the news this week, we're seeing all kinds of exciting things happening in the U.S. space policy. And it's like, okay, we're back to business. Action is happening.
Yeah, that's whether the things that happened are good or bad. It's definitely like no one can say that there wasn't things happening. That's the key point there. Yeah, I laughed so hard. When you read your piece here, the byline or the subtitle thing or whatever it's called. This newsletter is my constitutional right, which I thought was really funny.
Well, I think there's a certain inclination among journalists or writers, whenever there's a presidential election, to like explain it only in the frame of the thing that you care about.
Yeah.
And like you look at all of the post-election writing, it's like the election was won or lost because of my thing. So I mean, it's a little jokey saying that, but I think it has some truth in it.
Well, yeah, run us through, because it's when you say that, people can write in their head like, oh yeah, obviously it's your pet issue, but your thing wasn't a pet issue. It was like a drumbeat of a movement and a realignment maybe in certain individuals that ended up playing a big part in the
well, I think the
downstream
thing that
course of the
I
election.
was most interested in was obviously the relationship between the Biden administration and Elon Musk, which was tepid at first and combative by the end. And it just seemed like a missed opportunity because the Biden administration has supported SpaceX with a lot of money to do a lot of important things. It's been pretty helpful on the regulatory front. Obviously, the Starship back and forth is a big deal, and there's a lot of complexity there. But at the end of the day, they got permission to fly 25 times. But at the same time as all of this was happening, the Biden administration was sort of holding off Musk with one arm. A lot of it was outside of space. A lot of it was about EV stuff and Biden not giving credit to Musk for what Tesla was doing. But I think the job of the president is to try and get things done. And one of the things that people have been talking about in this election is whether, Biden or the Democrats or Harris could work with people pragmatically who have maybe different views on things. And I was thinking about it in context of what happened with Hurricane Helene, where we saw North Carolina really get hit hard. There was obviously a big federal government response to help out, but also SpaceX was sending in folks with Starlink terminals to bring communications to the area. And it was just sort of a classic case of SpaceX encountering the government, where the government was like, we have a big national emergency. We're flying in people. We're organizing this. We're not letting private people come in right now. And Elon was like, well, I just want to help and do my thing and contribute. And why are you keeping me out? And it was like, well, actually, there are good reasons. And there had to be an adult in the room. And it turned out to be the transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, who got on the phone with Musk and figured it out and got permission for the Starlink deliveries to take place. And then Musk was like on Twitter, I'm still going to call it Twitter, saying, hey, that was pretty good. And it's like, well, why didn't administration officials take that sort of approach in other areas? And, the Substack piece goes into other discussion of why that might not have happened. But at the end of the day, SpaceX is a big deal for the U.S. government, and space is a big deal for the U.S. economy. And it just felt like there might have been a different narrative around Kamala Harris if she had leaned into her role as the head of the National Space Council. And it was sort of like when Biden stepped down over the summer, we had seen obviously a lot of folks in the VC and Silicon Valley world saying, we don't really like Joe Biden, we like Trump, notably Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, the partners at A16Z. And when Harris became the Democratic nominee instead of Biden, Ben Horowitz, who had a long relationship with her, was like, well, I got to step back a little from the Trump stuff. I'm giving Kamala some money. And it's just like, well, what if she, as the head of the National Space Council, had cultivated a relationship with Elon Musk? And would that have been different? And who's to say? It was a very close election. Obviously, again, anyone voting, probably space was not top of mind. I think if you look at like the top 10 issues that voters cared about, it was not space. But I think there were like sensibilities and feelings in the world that I think it hurt the Democrats that they were always fighting with Elon Musk. And politicians need to figure that out. I don't know. But now we're going to see perhaps like a big revolution in space stuff. The early, reports and leaks dribbling out of Washington is that the SLS is finally going to get canceled, which has been something that anyone who's been following the SLS.
The most lovely placement of finally of all time. That's incredible.
And it's like, well, and this is not me like dumping on Boeing or the SLS program, but it is objectively just had a lot of issues. It also delivered a successful mission, but price is a real thing. And
but it delivered a successful mission. Is the criticism.
But what I'm saying is like, why did the Biden administration put in place a NASA administrator who was from a previous era, let's say. And we did not see a lot of, and I'm curious what you guys think, we didn't see big course changes in NASA's policies and approach to things in any direction. But I think a lot of people asked when Biden administration came in, are they going to cancel SLS? I think everybody was wondering if they would, and they didn't. And I don't think that anyone looking at the situation today thinks that is maybe the best choice. I don't know. So what I'm curious to see is if, a NASA led by Jared Isaacman does a lot of sort of pragmatic bipartisan stuff to advance the space program, that's all low hanging fruit that someone else could have plucked.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you nailed, like, this piece was perfect. Like there was, because you're exactly right. Is it like no one was at the ballot booth being like, well, I like Harris, but Space Policy Directive 1 was pretty fucking great. Like no one was doing that at the ballot box. But that being said, you're right. Like, it was a very tepid 4 years. Like, it was just like lukewarm, keep the status quo, don't shake the boat, like.
And I would want to say it was like tepid at a policy level. Like, the folks at NASA were still doing a lot of cool stuff. We've seen important mission successes. We've seen important science being done. Like, I'm not dinging NASA, but it felt like the energy went out of space policy under the Biden.
I'm going to ding NASA entirely. This was a complete swing and a miss of 4 years, in my estimation. Jake will probably could say this entire next minute and a half for me, because I've said it so many times, but they didn't make decisions in many areas where they had opportunities to apply pressure politically or to front run any particular issue. So I think Jake could speak to Mars sample return better than I can in terms of the way that was managed, and explicitly they punted that decision to not their administration. Bill Nelson, I don't know if he was gonna. Yeah, it was. They did not manage it, and then they punted the decision until after the election, and probably after Bill Nelson was out of NASA anyway. I don't know that he would have stayed on another 4 years if Kamala were to win. I don't know that he would have been extended that offer. He's a Joe Biden buddy, so that they kicked that out of their purview. The biggest thing, though, to me was that they were presented with the greatest opportunity to actively go out and fight for funding in the commercial space station market and to increase their budget on their low Earth orbit portfolio when Russia invaded Ukraine and the partnership was falling apart, as the ISS is actively falling apart. And they took no action to ask for more money in that department, to put any increased focus on it, but they kept it in the portfolio of things. Like $200 million is actually doing it for us this year. That's not doing it for us this year if we actually care about it. So, this is one area where they just didn't decide. Do they care about it or not? If they care about it, they could have probably went to bat and got $1 billion a year for a LEO piece of the budget. They would have had to sacrifice something, whether that is Gateway or whether that was pushing SLS farther out. But, tell me if you care about this or not. That's my biggest frustration. This was your opportunity. In the same way that commercial cargo and crew got funding after the original Crimea situation and after, the original incursion into Georgia and all that. Those were, if you look at times when Russia has went outside their borders, it was times where commercial cargo and crew got more money. This was the commercial space station time to get another 6 digits of money or 9 digits of money. And they just didn't even try. And that's insane to me. So cancel the program. Go get $1 billion or cancel the program. That's where I'm at with commercial LEO.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are definitely places where you wonder what sort of NASA's priorities are. And I think that's certainly one of them. I think, the complexities around the relationship with Russia and the ISS are very difficult. And I also wonder, when it comes to the commercial stations, what we've been hearing from Axiom recently, there was reporting on their financial situation, how much can NASA rely on commercial LEO destinations? I think that is their trepidation. And I think one of the consequences of the Isaacman, if he is confirmed, if he is even nominated, people forget, Trump has to send an official letter with his signature on it once he gets inaugurated. And 2 or 3 months is a long time in Trump world, so we'll have to see how that all goes. But you could see, Isaacman not having any trepidation about what commercial LEO folks are capable of, and that may be all the difference.
He also has personal experiences to free flying missions are fine. Like, you can do a lot on those. We're good. We'll keep doing a series of those.
I mean, and that's the other thing is maybe like the station concept of operations is not the one that will be the future of human spaceflight in LEO. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all, fantasize about a world where, what is the volume of Starship compared to the ISS? If you just had a Starship in orbit, what would that be like? And that's all fantastic at this point.
So many blogs have been written about that, Tim. You can.
Yeah.
It's another piece for your Substack if you want. You could take that.
That fruit is too low hanging.
Yeah. And well eaten fruit.
But I guess my point about them actively not making decisions in these areas is that it has led to a situation where no matter who won the presidency, no matter who was nominated to be the head of NASA, this administration of NASA was handed a set of questions that need to be answered, and they're forced to answer these questions because of the timelines involved with the programs at play: Gateway, ISS's demise or extension, SLS flying again, Starship being ready. All those things are due to happen in these 4 years. So whether you like it or not, these questions are forced upon NASA. Something's going to get canceled or delayed or downranked in its priorities. Something is going to happen in this, and we've just kind of now figure out who's the one that's going to sign the paper that answers the question. And
I mean, the one thing I would say is that you have to remember that NASA does not have a CEO. It has an administrator. And that person's job is to administrate Congress's priorities. And so I am going to be very curious. We've seen Isaacman tweeting about what he thinks NASA should be doing: canceling Blue Origin's moon lander, canceling SLS, refunding Chandra, all of these other things, having a commercial company raise Hubble. These are sort of the policy things he's talked about. A lot of those will not happen without Congress saying so. And so, we've heard reports from Eric Berger at Ars Technica that there is going to be a grand deal where the SLS cancellation will be paid for by Space Command moving to Alabama from Colorado, which is something that Trump tried to do in the previous administration anyway, not cancel SLS, but move Space Command. Yeah. And, maybe that will happen and that will cancel SLS. We'll see what the Colorado delegation has to say about it. But the other stuff that he wants to do, he can't do unilaterally. He needs Congress to back him up. It's a very evenly split Congress still. And I am curious to see what his charm offensive is going to be like to these members to get them on the same page as him. And I'm going to be curious to see what the message from Jared Isaacman is to senators and congressmen versus from Elon Musk and from Donald Trump. If Jared Isaacman is being like, I am a centrist and I care about space policy and we need to do all these things together, and Elon Musk is funding primaries against the members, I'm curious what their coordination will look like as they try and execute this strategy. And I think anyone who's pretending they won't be coordinating is being a little naive.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting because it's like, I mean, so you're right in that, Jared Isaacman, Administrator Isaacman, is not going to be some autocrat for NASA that's just going to be able to do whatever he wants. That being said, there's still a role for administrator. Like we've seen administrators, if they put the effort in and do the lobbying and make the relationships and have the conversations and work the deals, you can shape the policy from Congress, maybe not entirely, but you can nudge it into directions that you want it
Jake,
to go.
You can admit we are in our administrators matter era on this show.
Yes,
gone
we are.
through, we started out, the first show, we were like, who gives a shit? And then we were like, oh, they matter. And then we were like, wow, they matter a lot. So yes, we are on the upswing of that.
Yeah. So I mean, they can do something, and I'm 100% excited to kind of just as a spectator just watch what sort of moves they try and make and how they do it. Just as a policy geek, that's just gonna be kind of fun to watch. How do they approach that? but I'm just kind of drawn back to your point there, Anthony, of like there were decisions to be made, right? And I think that what this past administration did was just not make any. Like I'm trying to think back of any of the like last 4 years. What are were there any large new program starts or big program changes, or did they kind of just
the second lander
existing?
Second lander was the one thing that Nelson
that
went
wasn't
to
the
bat
administration
for.
Though, was it?
Yeah, he went to bat for that in Congress, and now was there pressure being applied from Congress to do that?
Yeah.
Sure. But that's the one thing I could chalk up and say, like, I know Bill Nelson went to Capitol Hill and had those discussions.
Okay.
And I would even paint on the Jared Isaacman point on that. I would even paint in the corners of what he said about that. I think it's getting shade in a way that it shouldn't, his statements on the second lander. I think his criticism was, we funded a second lander and we can't fly frequently enough to use a second lander, was his criticism. Was that like he's there for a second lander, but we currently have like a really slow flight rate, so we can't make use of that second lander. I'm pretty sure that was his point through tweets, but I should ask him about it directly.
You should. I think that's a generous interpretation.
But I will defend him in that he is going to be written about as like a tight Elon ally, and I think he only ended up that way because SpaceX is doing the best. Like, it's the same criticism you could say for why does NASA keep picking Falcon Heavy to fly all their science missions? Yeah, but they're like, oh, NASA must be such buddy-buddy with Elon. They're flying all their science missions on Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. It's like, yeah, because they're the only one that are appropriately priced and flying a lot. So if Blue Origin was in their era of flying a lot and they had a capsule and they were flying a ton to orbit, he would probably be flying on Blue Origin capsules just as much as he would be on a Dragon.
Yeah, I think you're totally right about that. But I think, in the world we live in, that is not what happened. And, the one thing about, there's been a lot of talk about what his actual formal relationship is with SpaceX. He released a letter saying that he's going to reduce the voting power that he has at his company, which will mean that he's no longer controlling shares in SpaceX because Shift 4 is an investor in SpaceX. So that's nice to see. I wish he would say, I'm not going to pay for or go on my Polaris missions. Because right now, presumably, he owes SpaceX hundreds of millions of dollars to go on those 2 Starship missions for Polaris. I think that's a conflict of interest. And so I'll be curious what he discloses about that and what he says his plans are for those missions. Like, I don't know, this is like putting on my dorky America hat, but I would love him to say that, as NASA administrator, I'm going to send astronauts on Starship missions instead of myself because that's who should be doing this or something. I would like him to separate himself in a public-spirited way that would reassure the people who are concerned about those financial conflicts. We'll see if there's anything at the hearings.
Yeah. That's the other, if we're moving on to the Isaacman thing now, it's like, there's sort of like two, I'm conflicted on Isaacman because there's sort of two perspectives. Like there's like, as an individual, will Isaacman be a good administrator? And I think on that side of it, I'm like, I think he'll probably do a pretty good job. And then the second question is just like, is the process that got us Isaacman as an administrator one that like makes the government healthier, right? Like, is that happening in the right way? And I think a lot of that is going to come down to whether the Senate does a good job in their confirmation bid or not, right? Because those are huge questions I have too. It's like, I don't know if we ever got an official answer on if he has any personal stake in SpaceX. I know he's like wanted it, but I don't know if he has it or not. But either way, like it doesn't really matter to me. But it's like if he either needs to like come out really loudly and say I don't have a personal stake and I'm good, or I do and here's how I'm divesting and what he needs to be like super transparent about that. And the Senate's got to do their job to make that happen, right?
And I will say there's like a process for this where the Office of Government Ethics is going to, talk to him and release an opinion on what the appropriate thing is for him to do. So, I mean, there's time for them to figure this out, but it's
also like, I get the worry about it. And obviously nobody wants shady things happening. And at the same time, I'm like, it's not like he's going from not rich to rich. If he were to make a lot of money on SpaceX, there's a relativism that like
his personal financial gains. What I'm concerned about is the impartiality of decision making in the government, because like I'm old enough that I started covering SpaceX back in the day when they were the outsider. And every time somebody went from ULA to the DoD or from the DoD to ULA, you know, Elon would be on Twitter being like, "These guys are corrupt. These guys are taking
Yeah.
bribes." You know, maybe not taking bribes.
And he was like, and that what he didn't tweet was, and that's a pretty good idea.
And so, like, I don't know. I think it's bad whenever there's concerns about financial conflicts of interest. And it's interesting to see who was like mad about, you know, good government and who was mad that it just wasn't their team in charge.
Yep.
Yep. So we'll see how it all plays out. I mean, I think there's a lot to recommend Isaacman for the job, especially, you know, compared to the whole universe of people that could be appointed for that. I think he's got some very cool and unique qualities, and he's said a lot of the right things so far, and, you know, we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How crazy is it, though? I realized this morning, that this is the first time we are getting a NASA administrator who we've seen run a space program before. Like we know what he would do if given a space program. We have now witnessed that, and a flight of it and a roadmap. So we have previous performance. I had no idea what Bill Nelson would do if given a space program, or Jim Bridenstine, or anyone, because no one ever was given a space program before.
I think that's kind of generous too. Did he run a space program, or did he?
Yeah, hell yeah. Polaris program is a private space program. He is drawing a roadmap for what a space program of his design would be like with that. Which is,
do we know how much he's designing it versus how much SpaceX is designing it to prove out their test program priorities?
Let me find. I've had some tinfoil around here somewhere, but no, I asked him about that last month. I had him on.
But like, I don't think he was like, for example, for Inspiration 4, I don't think he would say like, well, if I had a space program, I would send 4 people into low Earth orbit and raise a lot of money for charity. Like, those are cool things to do, but that's not what we need a space program for, you know?
Well,
and like,
I think Inspiration 4, though,
gone, like, a space program should test out new and better spacesuits. Like, okay.
Yeah, hell
I guess what I'm saying is, like, I don't see him as like this creative space thinker who's like articulated a vision. I see him as a very pragmatic person who like wants to push the envelope forward, you know?
And if NASA was doing exactly what Polaris was, which was, this is the current state of the commercial industry and what there is to take advantage of, and the thing they're not working on is this, I would like to incentivize the existence of that and continue to just drag it forward one step at a time. I think we'd be in a better spot.
Well, maybe, but one of my concerns actually right now is, you know, the commercial partnerships that NASA has. Some of them are doing really well. Some of them are doing okay. Some of them are doing quite badly. You know, there have been a lot of concerns about the structure of fixed price contracts, a lot of complaints from contractors about fixed price contracts, and a lot of concerns about execution. We have a series of CLIPS missions coming up in the next few months. It would be really nice if somebody stuck the landing, because if nobody sticks the landing on those next CLIPS missions, it's like, boy, what are we doing these commercial moon landers for? And, you know, one of the things that concerns me a little bit about Isaacman is, you know, the NASA administrator has to hold contractors to task. And I don't know if you guys remember when Bridenstine was the administrator and we were getting all up about Commercial Crew. He at one point had some stern public words for Elon and SpaceX because they were spending too much time and money on Starship instead of meeting their NASA contract. And he called them out publicly. Do you think Jared Isaacman will ever call out Elon Musk and SpaceX for being distracted or not delivering?
Yeah, that's the tough one. That's sort of like,
maybe you won't have to, you know, let's hope. Yeah. But, you know,
how much time does the teacher spend on the kid that's answering the most questions in class? Like, mostly they're yelling at the kid in the back who was like throwing gum through the classroom. So
yeah,
at that point, SpaceX was being a kid throwing gum through the classroom, and now they're like a straight A student for all of the NASA programs. So like, you know, apply pressure elsewhere, I guess.
I think what you're saying, though, I think is also part of that Senate confirmation thing. Like, I think that, because it's two-sided, right? The Senate needs to come forward and sort of like do their due diligence and ask the right questions and get everything out in the open. But like, Isaacman has a role in the confirmation process too, which is to define who he is and how he's going to behave. And, if I'm Isaacman, I don't know how possible this is, but if I'm Isaacman, I'm trying to think of a way that I'm putting a little bit of distance between me and Elon as a way to say, just as a way to say, we're different people, and I'm not just like his puppet, right? Like I'm not a lapdog for the Musk regime or whatever like that, right? I don't know how you do that, and I don't know what he can do without making everyone mad above him, but that is something that I'm kind of watching for, to see what he can do for that, right?
One thing I'm curious about in that vein is Mars, right? Because, we have like the Moon to Mars program that ostensibly is sort of teeing us up for going to Mars. And, one thing we've heard rumblings of, obviously that's Elon's priority, is to go to Mars. So I will be watching to see, is there more emphasis put on Mars, or do we say clearly like the Moon is the first priority? I think China will drive that, but that is sort of like one way he could differentiate himself, perhaps.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the China thing real quick? Bill Nelson is such a wild China hawk in space that is kind of unbelievable to me. In that Artemis thing earlier this week, he was like, "We can't cede the South Pole to the Chinese" or something. It's like,
well, did you see what Isaacman's statement was when he first came out?
I didn't. Not about the Chinese thing. I don't think I feel like.
When he starts talking about how the U.S. will never be second in space, who do you think he's worried about?
No, I'm not saying there's not a legitimate worry there. I'm saying Bill Nelson just went to 300 state dinners signing the Artemis Accords, which is we will not claim land. Also, we should claim the South Pole before the Chinese does. It's like a really head-spinning thing.
I think that speaks to why NASA's budget has been going up the last couple of years.
The paranoia around it.
The reason that Artemis is happening is, God love it, it's not for scientific exploration, and it's not really anymore. When Bridenstine and Pence sort of first rolled it out, there was a lot of talk about sustainability and staying there for long periods. And there's talk of that, but now it's really, we got to beat the Chinese.
Yeah.
And if you think Nelson is a China hawk, whatever Isaac, the rest of the Trump administration, that is why Space Force happened under Trump. I mean, one reason. So, the China scaremongering or just concern about China. And the other thing is it's very opaque to know what China is actually on track to do. Obviously, the things they're accomplishing right now are impressive. But when they talk about building a moon base, is that going to happen on their schedule? But, that is going to be what the administration comes to Congress to say. And that will probably be why Congress gives them money. Maybe I'm a cynic.
If you're a cynic, then I don't know what the hell I am for my take being, if you're scared about China, the best thing we could do is promote the Russian Space Agency to immediately work with the Chinese Space Agency as fast as possible, so they begin to have their space stations fall apart, not ours. That's my take.
I don't think we've seen the Soyuz fly to Chang'e 1 yet, have we?
Nope, but it's kind of like the space hardware Stuxnet edition.
Yeah.
we're gonna very slowly introduce some vulnerabilities to your space hardware by way of making you collaborate with Russia.
The only problem with that plan is that Russia hasn't actually really built any new hardware ever. So
yeah, that's the point.
like the last new piece, besides just rolling off more Soyuz off the line, the last.
Well, they got some OneWeb satellites they could launch.
Yeah, I guess Nauka, right, is the last new piece.
Warehouse somewhere in Kazakhstan.
Pretty sure, yeah.
Wow.
There's probably one in Putin's foyer of his vacation home or something. We gotta buy one someday.
It's Turkish.
We gotta find them and buy one of those OneWeb satellites.
I am impressed. I assume they would be pretty expensive.
That's why I said one day. I'm not buying it right now. If I was buying it right now, it wouldn't be on this podcast. Jesus.
Yikes.
Here's the thing that I wondered about is my biggest worry about Isaacman is that I really admire that he's a good example of what can happen outside of the NASA structure, and I don't know that I want him immediately sucked up into the NASA structure. I liked that there was an option for there to be a Jared Isaacman Space Telescope that he bought rather than was named after him 20 years from now by a NASA administrator that wasn't him.
It's a really interesting dynamic because one Like the reason that SpaceX has been able to succeed and the reason that people at NASA are excited about these commercial partnerships is they're basically outsourcing risk. They're like, we have some capability we want, go do it without bureaucracy and without Congress and without, hearings, and that's great. And now with Isaacman in charge, like, are they trying to bring that culture inside NASA? I don't know if that will work. Are they trying to double down on the outsourcing of risk? Probably, but again, with the way the commercial partnerships have been going, and which I think are like important in the future, but they need to be better. Is that going to work willy nilly? It's just like, I don't know. Once again, being an old man, you remember when Obama came in 2008, and they were going to cancel Constellation, and it's going to go away, and we're going to, do an asteroid, do all this other stuff, and a tiny little money for SpaceX, hooray. Congress and NASA got together and gave us SLS instead. And so I'm going to be curious to see what the dynamics are when Trump says, we're canceling XYZ. I think that the political calculus on SLS is now at the point where, that is easier to happen. And also Boeing is so crippled as an organization. They're not going to be a lobbying powerhouse. I think, honestly, like Boeing would be very, maybe not happy. Like, I think the CEO of Boeing would be like secretly pretty pleased if he didn't have to worry about the SLS anymore. But I do think there are going to be things that they really want to try to do, and they're going to find, there's like a congressional coalition that really cares about having facilities in these places. And, there's like a subcontractor who is important in this region. And I'm going to be curious to see how they can sort of overcome the, if I may, deep state of NASA to do the things they want to do. And not just of NASA, but of just like economic and political incentives and the way things are done and all of that.
Yeah, as I said, if you're a space policy wonk, time to get the popcorn. It's going to be a pretty exciting batch of fireworks for the next 12 to 24 months, I would say.
What in that vein, Tim? What would be your? Let's say you are the president or Elon Musk. You can pick which one you'd rather be. And you sit down in a room with Jared Isaacman, and you're like, "This is like, if you were to work out one-on-one with Jared Isaacman, what are the ideal goals for this era of NASA? Are there generic targets that you would give them, or are there specific targets like cancel XYZ or promote these attributes of NASA?"
Well, so I will first of all say, like, I am not like a space policy expert. I'm a journalist, so I follow this stuff, and I don't have a lot of normative views about like what should be. But one thing that I think about was there was a National Academy of Sciences report released earlier this year, led by Norm Augustine, the now ancient former Lockheed chairman who's done like every big report about NASA in the last 30 years. And he was talking about like real structural issues with the space agency. We are cutting the infrastructure and the foundations of the agency to spend more on missions, and it's not a sustainable path forward. And so I think a lot of energy has gone into people thinking about what is the role of NASA in a world where the government does not have a monopoly on space technology anymore, which is the world that we're in. And does it look like, NASA is a real frontier research organization, which is in some ways, but also is not in a lot of other ways. And like, I think it would be incredible if Isaacman could find a model of a new space agency that is maybe more distributed across academia and across industry. But I think a lot of it is like, what do we need a space agency for now? Like, what is the point of it? Because it's about national prestige, it's about scientific research, but like a lot of the frontier stuff is not so much happening at NASA. We saw them cancel the OSAM-1 mission this year. That was a priority. That was a choice they made. And they did it because industry was ahead of them, essentially. Like, industry was already deploying these technologies, and it was like, well, why is the government doing this? Now, there's still a lot of stuff that NASA is commercializing. Like everything SpaceX has ever done basically was previously a NASA project, and they just make it better and they make it manufacturable and they make it something you can get a return on investment for. But I think what's happening and what Augustine worries about is that we're eating that seed corn. Like I don't know what the next technology SpaceX is going to spin out of NASA is. I think they've run out of things maybe. And so figuring out what NASA does in the 21st century, what it is, where it really adds value is the challenge.
I wonder if on the table should be a big kind of coordinated effort between the executive and the legislative branch to update the NASA charter, right? Because it's kind of vague, and it was written at a time when, the space race was the top of the mind the whole time, right? So there's some of the concepts in there need a lot of clarity in the context of 2024. I think in their charter is specifically like developing space vehicles, and like that is probably one where it's like that really is not where you need to be spending a lot of effort right now, right? So I wonder if that would be kind of something like if you wanted to have, if you're an administrator and you've only got a 4-year potential chance to make an impact on this agency, and you want it to last beyond just like, oh, I spun up this program and canceled this program or something, maybe that would be something that would be. Yeah. I mean, and so you involve Congress and you get that updated, and then like you can set the tone so that the next 10 administrators have some firmer ground to work with, right?
That would be a big thing. And the other thing to think about too, and this is bigger than Isaacman and probably not possible, but we're also thinking about like, what are the agencies that should regulate spacecraft and space launch and satellites? And who is going to be the civilian agency in charge of space traffic management? So it's in the FAA, it's in the Department of Commerce, it's at the FCC, it's at NOAA. And like, I think probably people who have thought about this have probably said, if there was probably a single dedicated space office, like that would be really smart. And so like, and similarly, that is a lot of what came out of why we have Space Force now, is we needed a center of expertise for that. One thing I was talking to, I forget where I garnered this information, but in China's Space Force is part of its cyber and information warfare like department. So like cyber and space are connected, whereas they're siloed in the US. It's not really a NASA thing, but like, we have space stuff happening across the government, across military, across civil. It's not always super well coordinated. The National Space Council is supposed to be doing that. You can imagine someone coming up with a big reorg. I don't think Trump has the congressional majorities to make that happen, but I think there's like org chart stuff that would be basic fixes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've heard, the acquisitions agencies as being a potential target of Doge and whatnot, because there's a billion of them. Like within the DoD side specifically, there's so many different 3 and 4 letter agencies that acquire space technologies. This whole thing did make me think of a dumb and potentially scary question that I would like to ask. Between now and forever, when do we start doing crewed spaceflight under the DoD again?
There were anonymous reports that the DoD wants to buy a Starship when they're flying again.
Yeah. But I mean, I think of the name Space Development Agency, and I'm like, that feels like a thing that should be excised from NASA. Like, again, that's a DoD firm, but like NASA, their charter is like science and research and the development of, space knowledge. It does feel like a different thing to develop the capabilities to like expand humans outside of Earth. And I don't know that that's ever going to be well encapsulated within NASA itself. And I'm like, why? Yeah, why? So this is the thing that led me to like, why don't we fly to space as like a DoD? Why aren't there DoD professionals flying and landing on the moon? Because wouldn't that be like if we are going to be China hawks about it in the Bill Nelson kind of thing, then like, why aren't we fucking doing it?
I think if you asked space like security experts, they would point to like a very carefully balanced world of sort of like détente and an understanding that like
bullshit. That's happening nowhere else.
We're trying to avoid.
No, that's happening nowhere else. No, you're just ignoring it if that's what your thing is. Like, Screw that. Space has always been militarized. It's always been a thing of DoD focus.
And it's pretended that it hasn't been, and that's
I know, and that's stupid.
Well.
I don't know. I think it's dumb.
Or is it presenting World War III?
Well, I give nukes the credit for that, not our
I will offer you a normative opinion, which is that I don't think the DoD should be in charge of human expansion into space.
No, I don't. That's what I'm saying. I don't think that. I just like the name Space Development Agency. Like, I think that as a name is a good brand.
You think the Space Technology Mission Directorate should be spun out as its own agency?
Kind of, yes. Like it does, because it's in conflict with some of the other like scientific goals. It's the Greens and the Reds thing from the Mars trilogy. Like the people that want to develop space are always going to fight with the people that just want to study pristine space. And is having all that infighting in the same agency, is that healthy, or do we want it that way? I'm fine if we want it that way.
Well, I'm not sure that's necessarily always the case. Like, I have found people within NASA who are very excited about a lot of the stuff SpaceX is doing because it enables them to do more science. Like, it's not. I don't think it's a binary, and I think there may be people who view it that way, but I don't know if that's like the consensus.
The mass appeal version of it,
yeah. We'll see.
Yeah.
Well, I'm coming out strongly in support of having DoD members fly to space once again. Count me in for that.
We have them on the ISS all the time.
It's true. Again, it's always been militarized. We just make it up like it's not.
And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And thing, I would rather, I think, and for all the point of all the geopolitics, right, is to show off that the U.S. is technologically powerful, but we should also show off that we're like cool and not assholes as well. It would be interesting if there was like, not Space Peace Corps, but like a civilian, and like one way to think about NASA in the 21st century was, I think it was in the 1980s, they added to the charter, I think it was a Reagan executive order maybe, that NASA should be about developing a space economy. And maybe that is what NASA's job is in the future, is being the regulator and facilitator of that, and not like the...
Do you mean the Polaris program? Because it sounds like what you're describing as the Polaris program.
I mean, the Polaris program is a space program. It is like Elon getting somebody else to pay for his test flights, which is cool, but it is not a space program.
Yeah. Describe the difference between that and NASA policy right now, though.
Between two private space flights and a $24 billion...
No. I feel like SpaceX has always found a great way to have other people pay for their test flights. That has been their supreme strength amongst all strengths.
But that is because, NASA is going to get something back in the end. And so did Jared. He got a ride to space.
Yeah. And he's pretty cool. And what did you say? Cool and not an asshole? What was the priorities to espouse to the world?
Those are the things, which I think I would like to see more public figures put an emphasis on not being an asshole.
Good sign.
It is a funny thing that we have to ask for these days. It would be nice if, I was the one thing we haven't talked about would be, like, you mentioned like regulatory reform, and definitely a place they do. I have a take right now that planetary protection policy is like on a cliff right now. Like, we are just about to brush up against a big kind of conflict in that area, because Mars sample return is the one driving right now, but humans to Mars would be the other drivers. Like, those two things are coming up against a policy edge, where there's just like a no man's land of no one knows what the actual answer is. The policy doesn't support either one of those things, and it's not defined how you would, and no one knows who's going to change it and who's going to enforce it. Like, it's just, those are all just like completely unanswered questions that we are going to like crash headlong into. And I'd be nice if the next administrator would tackle that, but at the same time, I don't know if I want the Elon crowd running planetary protection policy, because I'm not confident there's a lot of respect for the whole idea in that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, chances that Zubrin gets named the head of that department.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hope that there are very reasonable and good policies put in place on that. I think the moon stuff is going to still be like the first thing we have to figure out. Like, I think it is fun to think about people going to Mars, And I know that Elon says he's going to send some starships there in the next few years, but I don't think that will happen in the current or like the next presidential administration. I don't see that happening. And I do think this is something that made me laugh a little. You know, Elon was saying the other day, like, we got to cancel the F-35 program because we can't have humans flying these machines when robots can do it better. The robots should be doing this. And it's like, why are we sending people to Mars? Let's send the robots. And I mean, he has his reasons, but I do think it's like, what are we going to actually do here? And I mean, it will be curious. Like, the other thing to keep in mind for this next administration is all we have heard about are budget cuts and tax cuts. So, like, I don't think NASA's budget is going up next year. You know, I don't think it's going up the year after.
Yeah, we shouldn't be talking about what they're going to do with more of what they're going to stop doing.
Yeah, seriously. And so I also wonder how Isaacman will do managing cuts rather than like launching a ambitious program. Or if he can somehow do both, he will be a bureaucratic hero.
Yeah. That's the politician dilemma, right? Campaign on cutting stuff and then govern on adding stuff.
I mean, he's definitely bitten off a big bite. It's going to be fun to watch him chew.
I kind of can't believe he said yes, to be honest.
I mean, I can totally believe it because, I mean, one, he's been running his current company since he was 16, you know? Like,
that's true.
You know, I talked to CEOs, all the, you know, it's a hard job. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of hours. And and obviously he's like way more excited about space than payments technology at the moment. So,
yeah,
I mean, I totally get it. I mean,
weirdest midlife crisis though. It's like all of a sudden run NASA.
I mean, I look forward to learning more about like the backstory behind it and what the conversations were like with Elon. If he ever met Trump before he was nominated, or did he just get it on Elon's say so? Like, because, you know, I assume he's making a calculus where he's like, I want to accomplish some things. If I can be the NASA administrator, will I be able to do that? And presumably he has gotten the assurances or the convincing he needs that he'll be able to do some things. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if I was a billionaire, one of the things I like about Isaacman is like, you imagine people who are billionaires, or you imagine yourself as a billionaire. You're like, what would I do with all that money? And most billionaires don't do any of those things. They just like make more money.
Continue to be billionaires and do the work that got them to billionaires, because it turns out they're addicted to work, not the money.
Exactly. And that's why that was one of Elon's earlier charms, is that he sort of was like, oh, I'm just doing cool shit with money. And Isaacman is certainly doing that. And so I admire his life construction. You know, computer guy, I'm going to get rich. I want to be a fighter pilot. I start my fighter pilot company. I want to go to space. I buy my ticket to space. And now I'm the head of NASA. I mean, it is crazy. Like, if Jared Isaacman had not bought a ticket to space, would he be the head of NASA now? I don't think so.
Nope.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
And he's in his late 30s, early 40s. He's a young man.
41, yeah, 41.
In Washington terms. So he's got a lot of runway ahead of him to do other stuff, too.
You said that it was charming that Elon was like that in his earlier days. I actually was thinking about the other day that, like, him not flying to space still is a thing that is underappreciated. That, like, he's had like middling interest in like maybe one day. He's just so uninterested in flying to space when you look at the typical comparison of Branson and Bezos, which is like fly to space, immediately ignore it to some extent.
You're right. That is also pretty charming for Elon, I will say.
He's still got it. It's still in there. It's still in there somewhere. So
yeah.
We'll see.
I mean, it's going to be a very intriguing couple of years.
Well, we appreciate you hanging out with us. You need to plug some shit. You need to plug, a book, a Substack, a Payload. You need to plug so many things.
We're plugging Payload Space, baby. Become a subscriber at payloadspace.com. You will see me there most mornings. We have a lot of scoops, a lot of fun news. You will see it there first at Payload. That's my pitch. Hey, there it is. Look at that. Good work.
Payload.
And I do have a Substack if you want to sign up for that. It's just timfernholz.substack.com. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Blue Sky. Follow me down the street if you want.
Increasingly creepy.
I hope that's not my personal brand now.
Yeah, you're good. You're still good.
You're good. You're good.
Jake, it's time for the Off Nominees, baby.
Next week, coming up.
Tim, every year we do a thing called the Off Nominees, where we take the wackiest, craziest stories in space and figure out who was the winner. Things that went the most wrong, most comedically.
Can I get a preview?
You could see if you can remember anything that happened this year that was wacky, because I guarantee you will not even think of the ones that were the best.
I mean, I am also about to start on my year-end roundup coverage, and I have not yet started. So really, I'm just trying to get you to do my work for me.
I collect these all year because there's sometimes ones that happen and you just totally forget about them. But we had 3 funny moonlanders this year, Tim.
2.5.
Well, they're all
I'm
pretty funny.
generous to intuitive machines. I'm generous to intuitive
But
machines.
it's funny. It's funny that it landed on its side. And an underappreciated part of the story, I'm pretty sure they were really close to crashing into the moon, and they've never told anyone how low they came in to lunar orbit at, and they still won't tell me.
Well, I'll ask the next time I see.
They won't tell you.
Well, I'm very
Single-digit kilometers is my assessment.
Hey, not everybody gets out of that, if that is true. Actually, I remembered my favorite weird space thing of the year. Remember that Chinese rocket company that was doing a hold down test and forgot to hold it down? That was wild.
Incredible.
Accidental
the static
launch.
The static fire that was an actual launch.
That was really
That's what I'm
good.
saying. Now, I will say,
year.
there are always some smaller ones that everybody forgets. There's obviously a handful of Starliner ones that happened this year. There was, weird sounds coming out of its speaker and like kind of chaotic, weird Starliner stuff.
Oh yeah, the weird sounds.
Weird sounds.
I forgot about that.
It was kind of like a fart smell on the ISS recently too, wasn't there?
Was it farts?
Alex?
Yeah. Death by farts. Last year, here's what I'll do too. We'll do a little preview. I'll run you through the last 5 years of winners and see if you remember some of these. So we'll go in reverse chronological order. In 2022 and 2023, I don't know. I didn't update the website, Jake. Who won last year? I gotta update. I didn't update the website.
We always forget to update the website until the next year when we notice it's not updated.
Okay, so in 2022, Oleg Artemyev threw a CubeSat into the solar arrays of the ISS. I don't know if you remember that.
I do. I love hand deployed CubeSats.
Yeah, that's the greatest.
That's like, when it's like why, like when Star Wars is good, it's because space is old. It's like when space is good, it's like dudes chucking satellites off of space. So,
yeah. 2021 winner was just Nauka, that won for all of its travails. Just spun the space station. 2020, the Florida Boaters. I need to pull this up full screen. The Florida Boaters that photobombed the DM2 splashdown. So that was an incredible one. Let's see. 2019, Omega's observation, when they did the static fire and they said, we've had an observation.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. Got new terminology out of that year. And 2018, as we described it, the daggering of Soyuz MS-09, when they cut into a Soyuz with knives and scissors on a spacewalk.
Yeah.
Like that's up there with chucking the satellites off. Like that's how you're
Russia's always good for
well every year.
Yeah. They're always good for one. So that's next week.
That's next week coming up.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
I think that's all we got, Jake.
All right. Tim, thanks so much for hanging out with us. This was awesome. I think we had another great session of aggressively agreeing.
Yeah, we fought about a couple things. It's good. Yeah. We always are smiling and fighting. I love it.
Our disagreement, I guess, is whether the military should lead the conquest of space.
Yeah. I guess so, and I'm like all of a sudden into it. So
the conclusion is Anthony is a warmonger.
I think so. I'm the Lindsey Graham of space. So whatever, we'll go
you
for
and Eric
it.
Berger will have a great time together now.
Oh man! All right, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye.